Okay, it being late, I will call this meeting of the Select Board of Manchester to order. Kathy?
Yeah.
Brian?
Yes.
Ann's here.
And
John's here.
our new member.
Ah,
Move it past them.
I would
Right past.
well, you don't have a name. Yes, Jeff.
I gotta put pictures on the ballots.
This is great. Kind of like the menus at McDonald's.
Yeah.
All right.
No, do they?
That's 100%.
Excellent. And I'm gonna call the meeting of the planning board to order. Let's see, Chris Olney,
Here.
so Sue Philbrick here, Peter Morton, Mary Foley,
Here.
and Sarah Creighton.
Laura's somewhere
and-
nearby.
Yeah, Peter Morton. I said Peter. Peter was sworn in this afternoon. We're good. Laura, right here, and Laura Kenny.
Right here, Laura.
Here. And Gail, do you have your hand raised or can you hear us?
Can hear you, and I don't think I have my hand raised.
No, my cursor was a hand. Task force. Oh, you don't have to do the task force till 7. Okay. So you must take the, or you want me to?
Why don't you start?
Okay, I think our order of business is to appoint a member to the vacancy that was filled by Ron Master Giacomo. And we have one applicant, Gordon Brewster. I think people have received his volunteer application by email. So thank you, Gordon, for being willing to step up. And I think it would be, I can show him how to, anyway. So if you could just introduce yourself and how you've been involved with the town and why you want.
Could be a long story. So my name is Gordon Brewster. Hello, everyone. This is August body here. So my family and I, Donna and I, my wife and I have been living in Manchester for near 40 years. Brought both my sons up here. They went through the schooling system and they're since they're on the way. One actually is still in town. But professionally, I am a registered professional civil engineer. And I've worked as an engineer back in the good old days, as an engineering designer, but I've moved on to become a project manager for architecture and engineering for the past 30 years. We retired, both of us, John and I retired 5 years ago. So my job as a project manager was full oversight responsibility of all the architecture and engineering disciplines, everything from planning to scoping to scheduling to the architectural and engineering design to soliciting construction contracts and then overseeing construction administration services. Scope of the projects range from anything from a 500,000 square foot condominium to maybe a 500,000 square foot condominium to a 5,000 square foot corporate interior spaces. And the projects range from everything from primarily corporate and private development, but I also did laboratory spaces, fulfillment centers for somebody like CVS. I actually managed the national project for CVS, not for building the stores, but for building their infrastructure, everything else. So basically my responsibility has been complete start, meet the client to pass over the project when it was done. Most were successes, some were challenges, and I understand what we're going through right here. It's going to be somewhat similar. So my experience in Manchester about 20 years ago, I decided, I looked at the schools here, the school buildings. For those of you who are new to town, I don't know if you remember the old schools here, but they were in pretty decrepit state. And I remember when I first came here, I said, there's got to be something I can do to participate, to change and better those schools. So I was on the original building committee for the failed school, middle school, high school. And then I was on the successful, actually, Sarah recruited me to be on the new middle school, high school, and that lasted for a while. And I'm still, I guess, the reality is that I'm on the school building committee for the elementary schools. So for the past 20 years, I've seen probably the biggest projects in Manchester will probably ever do, and been on very actively engaged in on every aspect, from contractor selection to owner project manager selection, to architect selection, and then in the design, the little design subgroup, designing facilities and making sure they all work for us. So it's been quite an affair, and this, why I want to be on the planning board is, frankly, I love projects. I love the whole process. I love the process of development and seeing it all the way through here. This is a bit different for me because this is more on the town side and the planning board side, making sure that the projects meet the criteria as we established. So, but it is basically the same thing. It's thinking about the projects, understanding the scope and schedule, and then putting it together and making sure it complies with all the standards that we have. So in a nutshell, that's me.
And you're also on the downtown improvement committee.
I'm on the downtown improvement committee too. I'm working with Steve Carhart on that too, and that's an interesting project. It's a very interesting in that there's so much going on in this town that's going to affect what the downtown looks like. And it's what I learned early on is that we just can't do the downtown project as an entity and then do the culvert project as an entity and do all these separate little things. You just can't do it. And you have to really think about the whole town, the long-term effect, the benefits of what this will be for all of us, and also make it look good too. I'm very much design oriented. I love design, whatever it's good engineering or good architecture or whatever it happens to be. I love the fact that it has the magic of making a place better simply because good design helps here. And that's kind of my role with Steve. It's kind of the role with here. I'm doing that. I'm doing nuts and bolts types, estimating and planning and thinking about the stuff. It's also, I'm considering also the design. Actually, with the MBTA stuff that's going on right now, to have a design oversight board, a design oversight committee within, I think that's spectacular. That is such good thinking, such good thinking.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the planning board first, I guess. Anybody have any questions or for Gordon?
So of course, I'm going to,
Here's my softball.
here's your softball question. So could you, you've been involved, I guess, looking in on the task force meetings, on these meetings we've had about the downtown. I'm wondering what your take is on what we've been doing.
Well, I've had the luxury of sitting with Mark in his office for an hour and a half, going through the nuts and bolts of it. And, it's not dissimilar to what I did for when we were given a real project. But I know in a nutshell, I find it's amazing. It's architecture at its best. No, it's not building architecture, but it's architecture at its best. You're confronted with a challenge. You develop a team that's, it's the most amazing team of all time to do what they're doing in such a limited time here. And you're coming up with a palatable resolution, both for the town and hopefully with the state when it finally gets submitted. So I think it's truly amazing. I think it's truly amazing. That's what I told you the other day, and I haven't changed at all. And after sitting with Mark and hearing all the nuts and bolts of how this gets put together and it still works, it's incredible. Incredible. Everybody that's worked on it should be had a slap in the back. It's great.
These three here, task force, so as well as a bunch of others. Great. Any other planning board members, comments or questions? How about select board?
Kathy?
Just kind of a philosophical question. You have, your experience is outstanding, there's no doubt about that. Just a curiosity, the planning board, much of what they focus on is zoning, right? So it's not,
Yeah.
so maybe the management of those types of projects, not the building per se, right?
Yeah.
In Manchester, we like to kind of keep our character, keep things the same, but if there was one thing, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing.
Manchester?
Or the zoning, not about man, but keeping
You're
it
asking me a
focused.
loaded question.
I'm just asking, is there something in particular?
I've walked this town so many times and I know we all share that same love of this town, the collaborative, it's all beautiful here. But I walk to downtown and I can see it. Part of the downtown improvement committee has been, part of our role is also to see and understand what can we do to make it better, including road width, curb locations, whatever it happens to be here. If I were to wave it, can I wave that wand down?
Yeah, wave it.
I think the downtown lacks the character that it needs. It's got wonderful people, great town, great community, great population here. But there's so much of the downtown area, just walking, particularly the turn where the Cargo Unlimited is over there.
Yep.
I look at that a zillion times, having been in both the real estate development part, working for developers and also the design side of it here. I look at that and see there's an opportunity there to bring some retail up into the more central part of town and maybe even provide some sort of housing above it. Now, I know that's not in the role of the MBTA thing, but it could be, and it would be so much better for it. To string that whole downtown section, including that curve and that front section right by the historical. It's great. So you got it out of me.
I took a little bit. Okay. Thank you.
Just a comment. Thank you for doing this. You seem more than qualified and, we're lucky to have you. So thank you.
You're welcome. I've been in the town now for 40 years here. I grew up in the Centerville section of Beverly. I always wanted to move to Manchester when I was a kid. So I worked in New York City, did all my routine there, and then I came back and we came back to Manchester. It's been a real pleasure for me, a real privilege for me to do the work that I've been lucky enough to participate in. It's been great.
It's great.
Right.
Oh, just that you went from Centerville to Manchester, to leapfrog right over the farms.
I guess I did.
I guess, retired means that time is not, time constraints aren't gonna be an issue here.
Thank you, Becky.
Just thinking the same thing.
I'm sorry, I didn't
That's a
get
Becky
it.
question.
What I said was thank you, Becky, our
I'm channeling,
former
channeling Becky was.
member.
Becky.
Becky always asked, are you sure you have enough time to make this commitment?
So that's a good question here, because I retired from architecture, engineering, the formal world like that, but I still have a full-time job during the winter. At least I had up until about a month ago here. I'm a full-time ski coach in Killington, Vermont. And basically I have lived in Vermont from probably the middle of December all the way through the middle of April for the last 5 years. This coming year here, I've decided to cut back on my skiing coaching ability and just focus more on this. To be honest with you, and I'm not pandering to you at all. I mean, it's truly entered into the equation here.
Well, so there, huh?
That's an excellent question, Brian.
I'm gonna ask that question every day. That's my.
Do you have another?
No, I think that your comment about the downtown, it's not an inviting downtown.
No, it's not. It could be. There's so much.
Driving through downtown, there's nothing that generates any excitement. I would want someone to stop. Right? Maintain that Manchester's the town you drive through to go to somewhere else. And so from a different perspective, I'd certainly like to see a way that we could create some curiosity to pass by.
Yeah, there's definitely, it's gonna take the will to do it. There's definitely gonna take the will to do it. And the dollars and cents to do it here, but there's opportunities for here that are worth exploring. But just for instance, 20 years ago, the schools here were decrepit. They were decrepit, decaying, lousy buildings. They were poor institutions for learning. The educational program, terrific. The buildings in which we were housing it, not terrific at all. And look what's happened in 20 years. I mean, that whole area up there, it's almost a campus setting now. It's just terrific. There's no reason why that over time, not immediately, but over time, that could just be spread through the town too, to give it the look and feel that we all want.
Which is off the topic, but I'm done.
Thank you. John?
I think the key questions have been asked, Gordon. We really appreciate you raising your hand again. And apparently you're a man with time on your hands. I don't quite understand why or how, but being retired, I suppose that's part of the picture.
Part of the picture, but it's also because I want to do it.
That's good. And you like to build stuff, which is
I love to
important.
build stuff.
When on the planning board, it's good to have an appreciation for that. And so maybe the winters, well, I suggest you get back into the skiing thing. I'm a serious skier and you should,
You're a serious skier?
yes, you
We
should,
have to talk.
you should make more time for that if you miss this.
You know, I get over 100 days a year, and so at the end of 100 days, I'm ready to put the boards.
I never hit 100, but I did hit 50, but not 100. But thanks very much for everything we anticipate you doing. You've done a tremendous amount of your civic activities so far.
Anything else? Any other comments, questions for Gordon? I guess I'd just also like to point out that Ron was a professional engineer, and so having Gordon have that credential, I think is really helpful, especially as we look at cell signaling. I think Gordon's perspective will be really helpful in the short run. So I'll take a motion to appoint Gordon Brewster to the planning board.
So moved.
So second,
I'll second it.
any other discussion? So I'll take, do we want to take this as a joint vote or? do
Why
we-
don't you take the
Planning board vote and then- okay.
We'll have the select board.
Okay, Mary,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes, or vice chair, sorry.
Is there a motion from?
I'll make a motion for Gordon Brewster to be appointed to planning board.
Second.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Brad,
Yes.
Anne says yes.
John, yes.
There you go.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So you're welcome.
Welcome.
I hope you'll stay. If you, depending on your schedule, you'll get sworn in on Tuesday and then back here Tuesday night, 6:30 for sure.
Okay, so I don't know the timing of that deal, but I'm sure you'll,
Yeah, just go see the town clerk anytime on Tuesday.
so now I should just like step back or?
You can sit right there, it's fine. Excellent, but you just can't vote. I don't think the planning board is taking any votes tonight. We have a little time before the public forum and the task force is posted for 7. I thought maybe we would just review for the select board and new members, the sequence of events that we anticipate.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
That sounds great.
You want to do that or you want me to?
Probably Mark would be the
Mark?
person to do that.
All right.
Okay, I don't have the written schedule, but I believe, so tonight's the public forum. Which we will review the quick review of the districts. Then Emily will be here and review the zoning, and Chris will review the last portion of the zoning, which is the design review element. Next Thursday, there'll be a task force meeting jointly with the planning board to review any edits based on public comment from this evening or anything else we received. That should be probably one of the last joint meeting at which either the planning board or at their next meeting on the 10th, the planning board could vote to send the draft to the select board, at which time the select board would take it up on their meeting on June 17th. If the select board agree, they can vote to send it to the state for a review for compliance with the law. And hopefully we will get that report from the state back by the end of August, early September at the latest, so that we can make any last minute adjustments, either based on more thought amongst the boards or public comment or comment from the state. We can make the final set of adjustments before the planning board votes to submit it to the select board for what to be placed on the warrant for the fall town meeting.
So a couple of things for people who are new. Emily is our consultant who is helping us to develop a plan that is.
There she is.
Okay, yeah, come on in.
You answered.
So So that's, translate that. The other thing is that so for the select board, all of us tonight, but the select board, we appreciate you coming tonight because it's an opportunity to sort of run through it from sort of start to, I know many of you have been involved, but to its current zoning and hear any public comments. The vote that we're gonna ask the planning board and the select board to take is not one that endorses the warrant article one way or the other necessarily, but that it's simply to send it to the state to see if the plan that this work has put forward complies with the rules. And the task force was charged with coming up with a plan that is the best plan possible that complies with the rules. So that's what that vote will be. Anything else to add, or anybody else or questions?
Actually, we've never really heard back from the select board, but you've all been involved with this, at least tangentially. We've never heard any real comments back from any of you, except maybe some positive ones. And I'm wondering if, I don't know, we can count on the select board's support. I know Ann's been involved deeply in this, and I'm sure she's conveyed.
I've told them all sorts of lies about them.
We'll believe everything she says. So I just wonder if any of the select board members have anything they'd like to say before we get into this.
John.
The only thing that's really crossed my mind, and Ann has been quite communicative, and I think all of us on the select board have probably made a point to keep track of what the task force's thinking is. And you're kind of settling on one plan. There's no plan A, plan B. There's just the plan. And was that a recommendation of the consultant, or is that just, that's the way it evolved, and then really the plan B is so far off or so much less desirable than the plan that you've got, that's what you're doing? I'm just wondering why there is not, say, a choice to find out what people think.
That's a very interesting question. So I think the way I like to portray this is it's a giant jigsaw puzzle. And you start off and it looks impossible. And you get the corners done, and there's a group of people trying to put pieces into the puzzle. And then suddenly it all comes together at the very end, and that's kind of what happened. We certainly looked at every part of town to put some of these overlay districts in. It became clear to the task force that to maintain the scale and I guess the most important, the scale and to minimize the density that could happen from this, that there were very few places in town that would work. We had to rule out any of the districts, the existing districts that had 2 acre zoning, because a 2 acre piece of property could support, 50 acres or 50 units. So what we settled on is already developed parts of town, so there'd be less impact from new development as much as possible. The smallest lots we could find that would support 3 family houses, which is kind of the backbone of the community anyway, 2 and 3 family homes. And then we were left with where else could we still have to find 100 units somewhere, and we thought the LCD would be the place to develop housing which would have minimal impact on the downtown. So that's kind of how the thinking evolves.
I found it kind of interesting that the strategy that we settled on was kind of what was described in a newspaper article 4 days ago.
Yeah,
In fact, it was exactly.
yeah, I didn't.
And so, we're not alone thinking this way, and I'm not calling it herd mentality. I think that a lot of communities feel this is the smartest way to have a minimal or minimal impact of the program.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I would add one thing, and that is, we did begin to engage the public pretty early on. And I would say many of the decisions we made in terms of the direction to go was informed by input from people who've been coming to our meetings and coming to the forums and asking very specific questions about things like height of buildings and how many units could be built in certain parcels, and we try to make our decisions conform to what people seem to be voicing a preference for.
I'd like to say another thing about this too. There's a lot of talk about how we're minimizing the impact on the town and so forth. But there is a housing shortage in this town, and we all know it. We know seniors who can't downsize. We have kids who can't afford to move into town. So there is a need for more housing in this town, and this is not the best way to do it necessarily, but it is a way to generate reasonably priced residential units that will hopefully support the town and not be a nuisance for the town either.
Well, I think the statute was designed not for minimal impact. That was designed for maximum impact, but I don't think the legislature necessarily thought it all the way through. Because my impression is, and we should have some minimal impact, very minimal. Grow gradually. And I think that's maybe what will happen. But it's not going to be the explosion that I think they expected at the State House.
I'm still going to hear a lot more public concerns, okay? I do have some hesitation, like taking what I perceive to be valuable commercial space to generate good tax base without impacting the infrastructure. I gotta still hear that's the concern of mine, especially with, you know, cell signaling becomes an anchor at the up there. There's gonna be a lot of ancillary businesses that might want to settle up there. Or even I envision a boutique hotel at some point. That serves that, okay, which is just a gold mine at the top. So that's my concern is taking value. We carved out an LCD, and I'd like to see the LCD develop the way the original intent was. So that's one of my concerns. I'm gonna say something like this, blasphemous, because I'm a big affordable housing advocate. I work with a developer, with a lot of siting for a long time, I'm 40 years now. But you know, at some point, we're not making more lands. And sorry, it's just, you know, I'd love to live at the Ritz. Okay, I'd love to live in Boston. I just can't afford to. Okay, and I've accepted that. So I'm going to hear what the rest of the community has to say.
Can I just make sure I understand the LCD issue, and that is, I believe that this overlay district doesn't preclude the use of the land in with its underlying district, which would potentially be a hotel or.
Important to highlight.
Right,
that.
so
So let me just
a
go first.
property owner, in the same way that that any of these districts don't preclude the underlying district's use. You need a property owner or with a partner with some funding and development and other things to make something
That's
happen.
important to highlight.
Yep.
I guess, I mean, I've been watching this go on, and one thing I kind of don't understand is how we have overlay zoning inside of this, but where does the state begin and where do we end? Like, as far as setbacks and things of that nature, like, can we enforce that? But a developer could go back to the state and fight that? How does that work?
So,
Mark.
yeah, maybe Mark
Okay,
can answer
all
that.
right. So what we're adopting is local zoning. So it's an overlay district that the state's gonna review for compliance. And how we develop this is using a computer model. Basically, it's a Excel spreadsheet that has a lot of parameters set, and we put in the parcels that we want to add. And the state has already loaded in parcel data. And then we change the parameters. We increase the setbacks, we increase the height, we can change the numbers of units allowed per acre. We can make some adjustments and it'll evaluate which parcels are, can be built upon, and it'll give us a number. On this parcel with these parameters, you can get 3 units, you can get 4 units, you can get 5. So once, and then that's what the state's going to evaluate is our proposal, does it meet the law? And if it does, and if we continue to bring it to town meeting and it passes, it becomes part of our local ordinance. So there's no going to the state by anybody to get it overturned. It's a local ordinance, and they have to comply with whatever the rules are in our zoning bylaw.
So through the chair, so we govern this, like, once the state passes it, then we govern it from there.
That's correct. The state doesn't even pass it. They just say it meets the criteria. It's okay for you to pass. So, yeah, because otherwise, if we pass a non-compliant bylaw, it might allow for more housing, but if it doesn't comply, we're subject to the penalties, which they can cut off all the grant funding. There's other avenues of penalties that we will be subject to. So that's why we sent it in for kind of a preliminary review, because we want to pass something that we know is compliant.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
One other question I had was, so going down the road, if this for some reason gets rejected by the state and then it comes back, are we gonna have enough time to do revisions before a town meeting?
I hope so, yes.
Do we have a timeline of how long that takes?
So the state says that they have up until 90 days, I believe, to conduct their review and tell us. Of course, they're also conducting review on
Right,
100 other communities at the same time, but in theory, they should be back to us by September. If we have a town meeting set for November to bring this to the voters, we probably have enough time to make, I don't think there'll be big changes.
Yeah.
But we know, we have a consultant who knows what the state is trying to do, and she would flag things to us before we even submit them, if that were the case.
so we have a pretty good idea that we're where we should be.
Yeah, otherwise we'll be very mad at her.
Don't catch that last time.
That's it for me.
So I've been attending most of the meetings because my neighborhood is one of the ones that's impacted by the overlay. I think the team has done an excellent job in doing their very best to minimize any impact, and Gar is not here, so I'll echo what Susan said earlier. They have listened to the feedback and changed their plan based on resident feedback. I've witnessed it numerous times, so I want to applaud you for that. One suggestion is, there's still fear and hesitancy about doing any type of change. And I think it would really benefit the townsfolk, and I think you may have it already as a task force, but what is the impact to the town, the financials, whatever, if we don't pass something at fall town meeting? I think we could be clearer with standard collateral so that if inaccurate information starts to flow, there's a document that we can all point to, and this is it. And we all agree to it. And I would really encourage us to come to an agreement on that impact so that when the voters make the decision, because it's their decision, they have real solid information on both sides. And that would be my.
Well, 15 minutes from
I
No.
I have a question.
Yes, you
So I wasn't able to make the last meeting and the bylaw changed somewhat drastically from what the version I had to what I got a couple days ago. So I have about 7 pages of comments. Do I give that to the consultant to incorporate for next meeting? Do I bring them up at tonight's meeting?
Why don't you start now, since we have a little bit of time? Do
Well,
send them to Mark. And Mark can share them with Emily. And I suggest you send it to the task force as well.
Okay. All right, I don't want to bring it up now because the forum hasn't started, so,
Okay. well,
but yeah, I was surprised at how much it had changed, to be honest.
So, are there specific, substantive, what are the substantive, issues that you're, that you have identified?
Well, I guess I didn't categorize it by that. I did it by line numbers, but, waiving a lot of special permits is an issue, allowing accessory, uses by right that we don't allow currently. There's typos and cross references and things like that. I would restructure not having design guidelines within the bylaw. I would have it either in the planning board rules and regulations or reference our current zoning.
I can tell you why we did that. We think that the design guidelines will bring a lot of comforts, perhaps a little too strong a word, but are a way of showing the town that there are controls over what's going to be built. And we did discuss having it be something that the planning board controls, and decided that maybe in the future, that's the direction we want to go. But in terms of answering people's concerns about the changes that this is going to bring up, having the design guidelines in the bylaw is a stronger position than saying that we will have design guidelines and the planning board can amend them whenever they want.
And that's fair. I mean, I think it'll come out tonight. I mean, the design guidelines only go so far. We can really only oversee about 3 things for the state. So, you know, a lot is in there, but a lot cannot be enforced. So so there's issues like that. So, and I'm sure it'll all be discussed.
I'm not sure which version of the zoning, but one of the things last meeting, we did, talk quite a bit about the issue of special permits, and maybe when you speak tonight, you can, or Emily, you can explain that either now or I don't know if that's part of your presentation or.
It would be part of my
Okay, great.
presentation, but it's happy to just
Yeah.
quickly address it. Some of the zoning that we have now that requires a special permit for certain uses or for development in certain areas, that has been a red flag to HLC. I'll get into more detail. So what I have been doing, what other consultants have been doing, and I have talked through this with HLC, is we are retaining area for the special permit, but making it part of the site plan review, and I'll be happy to go into that in more detail when we get there. So you're not required to have a special permit, but you are required to address the criteria for the special permit during the site plan review.
Oh, sorry.
I
let me
would push
interrupt
back.
one second. Gail, you had your hand up earlier. Is that a?
Yeah, could Emily be at the table so I can hear her better? I do not hear her when she's that far back in the room.
Great, okay.
I see a space.
Yeah, we are on over here by Brian. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
All right, John. Okay, sorry, Mary, go ahead.
I've got to go to another meeting anyway.
And I'll wait to hear the presentation, but I would just push back on that, the site plan review and the design guidelines also have a waiver capability that all of the requirements can be waived. And it's part of my understanding that the state does not allow special permit procedures in the sense that you're noticing abutters or abutters can appeal the decision. So if all that has changed, that would be good news, but I don't believe that's true.
Convenient.
All right, so why don't we get ourselves, the task force members, why don't you join us, at least in the front of the room here?
There's no reason for us to-
But the select board can stay at the table, it's fine.
Fine.
Yeah.
No, I think
We
the-
wanna make
I think the
sure-
task force should be up.
Yeah,
the task force,
okay.
Yeah, we can-
Are we closing down the select board meeting or?
No, I think we're keeping it.
open to make a comment?
If somebody needs to, we have, there are 5 of us, and we have to have 3, we have one more, if one more person needs, I will ask if we should.
Yeah, we're encouraging it today.
No, that's
Yeah.
asking if it is.
Heard it many times.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
But I'm good. I'm trying to sit next to you. My sister loves it.
Greg, we need more here. Guard's not here yet. Guard, we're gonna.
We have a quorum of the. Gail, you have your hand up?
I'm putting it down.
I actually would be helpful because I'm gonna share slides if you see people, Gail, once we get to questions and answers. I may need help identifying people, particularly if Richard has something to say. He's a member of the task force. So so we want to call the task force.
Yeah, so I'm gonna call the task force meeting to order at 7 o'clock in the community forum. So, say Richard Smith is on Zoom. Richard?
All right, I can see him.
Oh, well, okay, we'll assume he's there. Sandy Barbara Turner.
Here.
Let's see, Ann Harrison.
Here.
Sue Philbrick.
Here.
Sarah Melish. Vinnie Hall.
Here.
And I guess Gar is not here, and Chris Olney on the chair. Okay, so this is a basic community forum. The way this is gonna work is we're gonna make a few presentations. At the end of each presentation, there'll be questions and comments from board members and from the public.
Okay, so I'm not sure who's going first. I have. the
Mark is
slides.
going
Mark's.
first. Let's go.
Yeah.
We have a lot of students. Are you guys from, where are you from?
Manchester, Essex
Yeah.
High School.
Okay, are you here for a class project?
Yes.
All get A's.
Yeah. Great, we're delighted to have you. Thank you for your interest in this important topic. And let's see, Mark, where's Mark?
Don't know what happened to
Mark,
Mark.
he doesn't feel well, so you may have to do this. He may have stepped out. So you maybe,
Okay.
okay, so,
All right, so let's go briefly to a brief history of what's happening here. The state passed a law back in 2021 called the MBTA Communities Act. And basically it requires cities and towns that have commuter rail or subways to create zoning districts that allow for a certain number of housing units, multifamily housing units by right. So that's basically the end of single family housing in parts of these downtowns or near these downtowns. These zoning districts have to be relatively close to the train station.
Chris, did you just say that's the end of single family housing in?
I'm sorry, for these districts, these overlay districts that we're creating. Oh.
But they remain on.
They remain, of course, anyone who has a single family house can stay.
Or anybody who wants to build a single
They
family.
can build a single family
It's
house.
really not the end of single
I'm sorry,
family.
the end of restricted zoning.
Mark,
That's what I meant to say. All right. So, the task force was organized about a year ago. And, we've been working diligently for a long time. Garth, thank you for that correction. It's really helpful. We have come up with a number of overlay districts that would be superimposed over existing zoning that would allow multifamily housing by right. And Mark will walk us through the districts and the zoning parameters, the rules for each of these districts. And there'll be a slide presentation. He's going to narrate these slides.
All right.
Okay. So,
Go for it.
yeah, the guiding principles, those are yours.
Oh, okay. So the task force, when we started off, said we wanted to do a number of things in confronting this challenge. The first thing was we wanted to minimize potential changes to the town's historic character or to its current zoning. The second was we wanted to preserve the town's businesses and restaurants. Third was we wanted to maintain the small scale and variety of architectural styles in the town. And finally, we wanted to reduce the number of new incremental residential units that would be allowed. So the requirement for Manchester is 559 units. They don't all have to be new units. They just have to be units that are allowed by current zoning.
Can I interrupt one more time?
Certainly, Barry, you're good.
I also think a guiding principle is to comply with the law.
Of course, yes. We want to make sure that
You know,
we don't want
More or
the
less.
state telling us that we're
Out of compliance.
Can one of you, Brenda, can you just minimize the little box, if you stand up and touch the screen? And minimize the, minimize, it. Just minimize, do the minimize.
Oh.
Nope, that's max. There we go, thank you, then we can see.
Pull it down, Greg, down to the.
Yeah, down to the bottom.
And,
There we go, thank you.
and I'm just gonna interrupt because I see the students in particular trying to madly copy down the slide.
Right.
All of this is on the MBTA zoning page on the town's
It's not yet.
website. But it will be, but the guiding principles are, and, much of the history that Chris just described.
And this will be recorded.
This will be recorded, so.
Well, hopefully this whole deck
Yeah.
will go up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Emily's deck.
okay.
Just worked fine.
So we already went over this, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, Mark?
Okay, so this is the requirements for what Manchester needs to comply with for an area for the MBTA zoning. So we have to have an area of at least 37 acres. And one of those districts that we create has to be at least 18.5 acres, which is half that size. We also have a requirement that we have to have 14.8 acres, which I believe is 40% of the total, within a half a mile of the train station. So there's a half a mile radius from the train station. And we have to have 14.8 acres. Each district that we create has to be a minimum of 5 acres. We can split that up into 2 or 3 little sub-districts with different requirements, but the overall area needs to be 5 acres. The total number of the capacity that the zoning has to allow for it is 559 units. And the average density of all of our districts needs to meet 15 units per acre. So some of the districts can be lower if some of them are higher so that they balance out at 15. So those are the basic requirements. Basically, our overlay districts do not replace the current zoning. So if there's something allowed in the underlying district that you want to do, like a single family house, within those requirements, you can still do that. The overlay district just superimposes these new allowed multifamily uses over what's underneath and sets certain additional requirements for those new uses. Property owners can create multifamily uses in accordance with these rules, but they don't have to. No one's obligated to do that. So you can build yourself a new house if you want to, or you can turn it into whatever is allowed under the overlay district. We do have the design guidelines that are part of the proposal. The guidelines will be reviewed later, but basically that's to ensure that areas where we do get additional housing, we are trying to match the traditional development pattern that we have here in Manchester. So, and all the, like I said before, all the underlying zoning district requirements remain unchanged for anything you do in the district, whether it's the use, height, setbacks, parking.
Mark,
Yes.
and I'd just like to ask you, did we come up with all these rules?
Well, we came up with the rules for our districts, but
the basic rules,
the basic rules are that we have to comply with are set by the state.
thank you.
So. So our methodology that we use to create our district is we try to use some existing high density parcels. So we created some target properties. Some are high density, some are cross properties where we would like to perhaps have a change of use. And as I go through the district, you'll see. So we created these target properties, and then we needed to make connections between them in a logical way so that we could meet the size requirements. Have that one large district of at least 18.5 acres and have other districts be 5 acres, at least 5 acres. We wanted to avoid our local historic district. We wanted to avoid most of the downtown area. The DIP is talking about addressing zoning for the downtown separately after this project is done. And we wanted to avoid critical resource areas such as flood zones or marshes and some of those areas would be excluded. And even if they're not, we wanted to avoid them as well. So. Various zoning parameters affect the density. So in order to set our district, the state has a computer model, which is an Excel model that's locked with certain parameters, and you put in your parcels that create your district, and then you can adjust the zoning parameters, and that can affect your density. So minimum lot sizes, setbacks, height, frontage, percent of the lot that's covered by the building, the percent of lot that's covered by impervious surfaces such as driveways, patios, maximum units allowed per lot, like a cap. And we have caps on several of our districts, and parking requirements. So you adjust those things and you find out how many units you can create in a, or that a particular area is zoned for as far as its density.
So Mark, again,
Yep.
under these rules, how many houses are we required to demolish? And how many are we required to build?
We're not required to demolish anything, and we're not required to build anything. So it's all up to the individual property owner, whether they want to rebuild expand their house, rebuild it, tear it down to do something under this overlay district, or continue to stay there and live there, or So we have our first district. This is our large district. It is just under, it's right around 22 acres. And so we have we targeted certain properties. So we targeted the Newport Park, which is the blue square up at the top, which is a housing development owned by the Housing Authority, and the Powder House development, which is in the blue to the right of the screen. And then there's several other condo buildings within that blue area that we suspected that wouldn't change if we overlaid this dense district over it. So we've had those two areas. And so in order to make the connection between these two, we went up Pine Street. We can't include the Powder House Reservation, is that what it's called? Yeah. We can't include that because that's excluded land, it's protected land.
Somebody's calling you.
You might curse. No. Someone's unmuted. Somebody's unmuted.
So by making this connection, we understood that Pine Street has this different character than these other areas. So we created, this into two separate sub-districts. So the blue is one sub-district, which is the Newport Powder House sub-district, and then the lower Pine Street sub-district. So there's different rules for the blue.
We're gonna take questions at the end, so just hold your.
I think it's
me out here.
Oh,
the
sorry.
technical difficulty. Okay.
There we go.
All right, so this next slide kind of shows the differences between these two sub-districts and what we did in adjusting the parameters. So we'll start with the Lower Pine Street district, which is the red district. It's 11.5 acres. The underlying district is partly in the general district and mostly in the D district. The minimum lot size is that you need in order to do 3 units is 6,000 square feet. So it's 2,000 square feet for the first unit and 2,000 for each additional unit. So we have a maximum of 5 units on a lot. So we put a cap on this district. We kept the height as what's currently required at 2.5 stories, 35 feet. We kept all the other building lot coverage, the parking lot coverage, and the total is all the same, and our parking requirements are the same. The Newport and Powder House is 9.9 acres. It's in 3 different districts. It also has the same density requirements. We don't have a cap because we have 2 large parcels with quite a few units on them. So there's no cap. There is a 4-story height limitation here of 45 feet with similar, slightly denser coverages. The other area that we wanted to include is mostly within the red, which is the apartments directly across from the train station on Summer Street. I believe there's 42 units there, so by including those, we don't expect any additional development. We wanted to include the gas station at the corner because that's a property that someday many people feel would be nice to have redeveloped. We can't bring that zoning district any higher up. I don't know what's the street up above there. Washington Street, because that's the local historic district and that we wanted to stay out of that. We also didn't want to go across the street on Summer Street to where Crosby's is and the other businesses because we didn't want to remove those businesses from the business zone. We don't want to lose your one market in town. So we went across C Street and a little bit up Summer Street, in order to get our 5 acres. So go to the next slide, you'll see what we did for density here.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you for a second, Mark.
Mhm.
And just so you don't get confused, on the slides, the Summer Street sub-district is labeled in the tables as Beach Street. That's my mistake. So we'll fix it.
Okay. So, the one that's labeled Beach Street is, the one in red to the left. So the underlying district here is general district. That's 2.9 acres. We use the similar density in most places, 2,000 for the first unit and 2,000 for each additional unit. But, we kept the height at 2.5 stories and the lot coverage similar to pretty much everywhere else we've been doing, and kept the parking requirement the same. C Street, we made that a separate sub-district because we wanted to keep that density a little bit lower. And so that's only 2.3 acres, and that lets us get just over the 5-acre minimum. So that's 3 parts of 3 different districts. You did put a cap on 4 units per parcel. So the maximum you could do on a lot is 4 units. You have the same height limits and density requirement, lot coverage requirements. The next district is further up Summer Street, and it runs from Allen up to Lincoln Street. We chose this district because we can include a large number of residential condos, and actually I believe it's a small commercial condo building along Brook Street, and also at the corner of Summer Street, there's 5 houses together, 3 of them are condos. So, and then we also have the gas station at the corner of Lincoln and Summer. That was also a target property because the gas station is in a water resource protection district, and at some point, if it was redeveloped, that would help protect the water supplies and ensure that we wouldn't have a spill in the future. So in order to make that connection, we had to run down Summer Street a little bit, include a few properties across the street. And that's how we created this district, which again is slightly over 5 acres. So the next slide shows that it's 5.5 acres, that it's general on one side of Summer Street, and on the south side of Summer Street is the A district. We have the base unit being 2,500 square feet, and then 2,000. We were able to do that for each additional. It's just a slight change. Most of the other requirements are the same as all the other districts in our current zoning. So, and the last district is the Beaver Dam Road District, which is up off of School Street. It is the big storage facility. It's 6.8 acres. So this particular site was small enough that we could get the remaining density that we needed on one parcel of land. So go to zoning parameters. Here we have 7.6 acres. It's in the LCD. We put a minimum lot size of 5 acres because that's what it is now for the LCD. We put a cap of 100 units because that's what we need in order to meet the density and meet our for this area for our overall density. We did a 4-story height limit. Although the zoning for the underlying district is 5 stories and 55 feet. Based on public comment, we dropped it down. And again, we have similar lot coverages and building coverages. We did increase parking to 2 spaces per unit in this district because it is really not a walkable district to anywhere but trails of the woods. We did play around with setbacks, so we were able to kind of maintain or have similar setbacks in some of the districts. So on the Pine Street one, we have 15. On Newport and Powder House, we have 5 in the front and then 10 in the side and the rear. Those are the areas that are mostly developed. Beach Street is 5 and 10. That's in the general district. And then C Street, we were able to move it up just a little bit. Allen to Lincoln, we're able to do 15 per, and then Beaver Dam Road, we're able to do 50. That site is pretty much surrounded by open space land on 2 of the 3 sides. If we change those parameters very much, it affects our numbers of units you can put on certain parcels. So those are the kind of the numbers that we had to settle with.
In order to comply with the law.
Exactly.
Well, Mark, you might address the fact that we're, the affordability requirement, it's not a requirement, but what we're trying to accomplish.
Oh, yes, I didn't see that. So the planning board voted at the last meeting to have a feasibility study, which would determine if we can increase, there's a need and to increase the affordable requirement to 20%. The law allows you to have a 10% requirement, but with a particular type of study, you can, if you can show the need, you can go to 20%. So,
To be determined.
so yeah, so at 20%, unless you build a 5-unit building, if you build a 4-unit building, you wouldn't have to do an affordable unit. If you do 5 units or more, you have to do at least 1 affordable unit, depending on the numbers. So based on prior public input, here's kind of a rundown of some of the changes we made, not all of them, but obviously the location and characteristics of the districts got adjusted and moved, based on comments. We reduced the height of the Beaver Dam district from 5 to 4. We reduced the height in all the other districts from 3 to 2.5 stories. We increased the setbacks along Pine and Allen to Lincoln Street and C Street as well. And we added the caps of 4 per parcel on C Street, 5 per parcel on Pine Street, and we did put a cap on the LCD of 100 units.
Mark, can you just define what public input means?
Well, the people who attended the previous public forums or other meetings held by the task force, as they were all public meetings and they were on Zoom.
Correspondence.
And
Correspondence.
exactly, and written correspondence.
So we changed it in response to comments people made in person, on the internet, correspondence and so forth. We adjusted what we were doing.
Yes. So here is, so when we put all those properties into the model to create these districts, and with all the parameters about the setbacks and height, etc., we get certain densities is what comes out. So, so for example, Pine Street, the density is lower because we put a cap of 5 units per parcel. So we've got 12.8, a pretty low density. But on Newport and Powder House, because we're all overlaying already dense housing developments and existing condos, we boosted that density up to kind of accommodate that. So the capacity, the most that could ever be built there is 142 for Pine Street and 182 for Newport and Powder House. But there are existing units there. This isn't vacant property. So the 74 already existing in Pine Street, and there's 96 already in Newport, Powder House. So the possible future units would be 68 for Pine Street and 86 for the Newport Powder House district. With the Beach Street district, we have two sub-districts. So we have Beach Street at 20 units per acre. That's the district that includes the existing apartments directly across from the train station. And then C Street is that little section that wrapped around C Street and a little bit up Summer Street in order to get our 5-acre district. We kept that density really low, but it's a small little subsection, so that was okay. So the district on Beach Street has a capacity of a maximum of 58 units, but there's already 42 there, so the most that could ever be done is 16. And the C Street district, the capacity is 15, the number of existing units is 7, so the most that could be there is 8 additional units. Allen to Lincoln Street, which is a little further up Summer Street, we modeled that at 14.2. The capacity of district is 75. There's 32 existing units there, so the possible future units is 43, although realistically it's probably a lot less because we overlay a lot of condos. And then Beaver Dam, by putting the cap, our density is a little lower at 14.4 units an acre. We got 100.
Should be
100 cap.
Yeah.
Nobody.
I think this is also.
That's
There you go.
There you go.
That was good.
Real time fix.
Yeah.
That's good.
So,
Can you make it bigger again?
I'm trying to. It's 572, the right number.
Good job.
These are still
what?
572 is what those numbers add up to. So we still have to double check all these numbers.
Yeah, okay. Because the computer model says it's 583.
583. All right, so then one of these numbers is wrong, so.
Okay.
So we can go down.
So,
83, so something is off by 1 or 2.
yeah, so the numbers might be slightly off.
But you get the,
But the capacity is 583. We have 245 existing units, so the maximum possible future units would be 338.
okay. So do you wanna, are we gonna,
So I don't think, I think we had Beach Street as 20 acres.
yeah, I think. So we have to just double check these numbers, but I think directionally there.
The 20, you mean the 20 in that chart?
The sub-district fee, that's not correct.
That's
That's
the
not-
density.
No.
The 20 acres.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, it's a different. okay,
Density.
thank you.
And it's really not
Units
Beach
per
Street,
acre.
it's really Summer Street. That's
Right,
there,
Summer.
I laid it out.
Right.
Okay, should we take questions, comments?
Well, I'd like to interrupt one more time. Just
No,
one
if
more
your
time.
chance, Guard, I can make a comment.
Mark, why are the people sitting, are the people around here paid?
No, I don't believe they
No,
are.
nobody's paid to-
That's correct.
And the only paid
There,
people,
Mark and I are.
okay, so there are 1, 2, you're paid. And Tiffany, where's Tiffany?
It's not like,
Paid. So there are 4 paid people, and the rest of the people working on this are volunteers, which is how our government operates. It operates with volunteers to a large extent, and that's what we're doing. And we're trying to comply with the law is what we're trying to do. You know, it's not easy, but we're doing the best we can. So, thank you. Then, and Ann Harrison is the chairperson
No,
of the select board.
yeah, what I was going to talk about a little bit is Mark has mentioned several times that we tried to include areas that are condos. So why? The reason, generally condos are set up so that the land belongs to the association. The individual buildings are owned by people. And getting the condo association together to agree to rebuild itself seemed unlikely. So the reason that we included condos is that they are very difficult to redevelop. And yes, that is a direct reflection of I'm sorry, I was looking at you, thinking that you were John, who had said.
I don't think I'm John.
No, I don't think you're John either.
But I think the same reasoning was behind picking the small lot sizes of 6,000 that you would have to accumulate so many lots from multiple owners in order to have an economically feasible project.
And those were reflected in the Globe article a couple of days ago, which said that towns are trying very hard to find a legal solution that does minimally changes the community.
And that's one of our guiding principles, is to make as few changes to our town as we can. That's what we're trying to do.
And the great thing about that article is developers were complaining about
Okay.
More comments from board members?
I have a question. I'm sorry, can we take questions from board members
Oh, I'm
first?
sorry, excuse me.
Sorry, that's fine. Well, then we'll have to hear from the public. Questions or comments from task force or planning board or select board in any particular?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out is that the setbacks that we used in the majority of the districts are the current setback requirements in the general district. So general district has 5-foot front setbacks and 10-foot side setbacks. So we were trying to mirror the existing zoning with respect to setbacks and height to the extent we could.
Could you just clarify, are you, on these districts, are you, is the maximum size per unit 2,000 square feet? And then in Allen District, 2,500 square feet?
So it's not the size of the unit. So if you have a parcel of land, you need at least, let's say, 6,000 square feet to do 3 units. How you get to that 6,000 is you can set a base number for the first unit and so many additional square feet per additional unit
Of land.
of land. So if you have a lot of, let's say, in most of the districts, we set it at 2,000 for the first unit and 2,000 for the additional. So if you do a multifamily building, which is 3 units, you need 6,000 square feet.
But it doesn't say how big the apartment is.
It doesn't say. Now, the model will somehow magically calculate that you can put 1,000 square foot unit on those parcels.
So the
So,
model,
So-
if
So
I
you-
interrupt, the model uses 1,000 square feet. Once you calculate the building value, the model uses 1,000 square feet as the average size of the unit. Under the compliance guidelines from the state, you are not allowed to limit in your zoning the size of the unit.
Can I just expand on that also? So that means that if you have a 4,000 square foot lot, you don't qualify
Right.
to build the multifamily housing. That,
I'm just, so I wanted to clarify if we were putting, and you can't put a maximum. So I would just look at this and say, you know, where we have 5 units maximum on Pine Street and 4 on C Street. The developer could come in and say, if he's bought a piece of land that I don't want to do 5 units, I want to do 3 and I want them to be big, right? They can do that.
sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. They don't have to max out the numbers of units if they want to build big units, because that's what they build is luxury, big, unit development. They can build 3.
But they would have to meet all the dimensional requirements and the design standards.
Yeah, I think
Okay, so any other comments from the board members right now? Okay, we do have a lot to cover tonight, so but if there are comments from the public or questions,
Hi there. First of all, I want to thank you all. I just know from the view of you.
Could you say your name?
Oh,
and
yeah,
your
I'm sorry,
address?
Linda Surdam, 16 C Street. First of all, I want to thank you all. I know the hours, and the number of meetings you've all put into this, so thank you. So my question is, do other factors come into play, such as traffic, safety, Concom issues in these overlay districts? So if something is in the overlay and it's close to a Concom issue, how does that?
maybe Emily or Mark, you want to take that?
Yeah, so
You want to start and I'll finish, or however?
I was just gonna say, as it relates to Conservation Commission rules and regs, they do not disappear. They
Okay,
still have to file if they're within the jurisdiction of the Concom, they would still have to file a request for determination or a notice of intent, depending on what they're doing and how close it is to wetlands. And so they still have to comply with that.
as well as safety issues, traffic safety.
Yes, I mean, if it's a large development, you can require that they do a traffic study and that
Well, even if it's a small one, if it's a.
Well, I mean,
The site
they're all-
plan-
yeah,
the site plan review process
Yeah,
takes care of that. You have to address circulation, access, et cetera, as part of the site plan review.
And then another really stupid question, what is 1.5 parking places? Could you explain that to me, please?
Round up.
Round up, it's in our existing zoning, so you, 1.5 per unit. So a 2-unit would be 3 parking spaces, a 3-unit would be 4.5 rounded up to 5. And that's already that's our current zoning.
Okay, great, thanks,
Yep,
Sarah.
that's fine.
Can I just clarify? So our current zoning, you only start the rounding up when it's 4 or more units?
No, if you look at the zoning, the number of parking spaces are listed per unit, but they're actually 1.5 rounded up.
We
The
can,
count is the
that's a
1.5.
detail that let's try to
Yeah.
keep it on a
Yeah.
high level. I think the intent is.
Yeah,
as I described.
because a 3-family just requires 5.
Right, which
That's
is
rounding up.
4.5 rounded up.
Okay, other comments? Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Banks. I'm at 44th Street. So I saw the number 338. I know there's maybe some questions about the numbers in that actual slide as the number of possible future units. Can you just make sure, just very quickly, is 338 units being built in the near future? Or is it imminent? Or is it possible, right? Like, where are we in terms of 338 new units are being built in town? That's not true, right? So, can you speak to that a little bit as far as
Okay, I don't
Greg,
know, do you want to show?
easy
So
question?
then-
Let Greg,
There's-
Greg talk to it.
Yeah, so there's another study that the planning board may ask to be done called propensity to change study, which some consultants do for communities. And what that does is it's in, and I'm not familiar, I think Emily can explain a little bit more about how they do it, whereas she's a consultant. But what it does is it basically tries to evaluate what is the likelihood of those units being built. So a lot of those units are overlaid on existing condos, so they're not going to be built. So, so those would be removed during that study, and there would be other evaluations, maybe, I'm not even sure. I'll let him, before I start guessing, I'll turn it over.
So you're asking a very common question, which is once the zoning passes, how quickly is something likely to be built? So first of all, just to say that zoning does not equal immediate development. There's a lot of things that go into developments that are not zoning related. The market demand, interest rates, which are currently high,
Zoning is a choice, and so if the property owner doesn't choose to do anything with their property, then nothing's going to happen. Mark alluded to that earlier. The propensity to change, it's a model that a colleague of mine has done for a number of communities. And as Mark says, it looks at a number of factors to decide, is this property likely to change in the near future? Does the zoning provide enough new value to it that a property owner might make that choice to do to change their property to multifamily? And so the model that they use can give an estimate of how likely that is to happen. But when you look at the sort of the excess unit capacity that this zoning has over what you have already, you also have to think of, you know, how quickly could that be absorbed? So, and there is a permitting process. So what we're seeing in most of the communities that I and my various colleagues have worked in is that this is something that's more likely to be gradual, especially in a community like this one that has used multiple districts. They're looking at zoning some multifamily that already exists while leaving the option open for maybe some smaller projects. That's likely to take more time. As we understand it from the projections that have been done, that's likely to take more time to happen than maybe some other communities that might be zoning for those larger units and have parcels that are currently undeveloped. That's not the case in this community.
And I also just add, we have we have two family by right in one of the D districts. And I believe I looked at that, and that's been for many years. And 70% of the homes remain as single family homes. So I think that's evidence that if you zoning and building out zoning in a full build out are two very different things. So I think and also some of the districts have been built, as Anne described, for existing condos which don't have that full build out. So it would probably be at the end of that development's life or that those would get fully built out. So
And I'd add to that to say that we've had by right 3 units in an existing structure in the general district for 50 years, and very few have been built out. There's obviously constraints in an existing structure, but there've been challenges, and so we've had very little of that occur also. And plus, with 176 other towns, I think there's a lot of other towns that are riper for development than Manchester.
Greg, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, it's just instructive, just historically, to look at development in town. So we, on an annual basis, if we have 5 new homes a year, that's a lot for Manchester. And most of those are tear down and rebuild. They're not new construction on new land. So if you look at our current density, you know, we have the capacity for hundreds and hundreds of new single family homes. And we're seeing.
Not in the downtown.
Not in the downtown, but I'm just talking townwide.
Right.
You know, with 9 square miles of land. There's the capacity, there's the zone capacity for hundreds and hundreds of new units, and we're seeing a handful a year at most. So I think that's instructive, and obviously things change, and you know, past and don't guarantee, as they say in the stock market, the past and don't guarantee what the future will bring, but I think it is instructive to see what development happens.
Okay, I want to keep us moving here.
Other question.
One more question. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple different questions. Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Justice Road. One is the term by right. So by right means that rather than be in a potential single or 2-family zone, we're now allowing for multifamily. Other than that, by right has always meant that you don't need to go through certain processes of approval. And I saw in some of the proposed bylaw that there was a pass on certain districts as to water and other things. That do we need to do that versus make sure that we're checking all the boxes that we need to regarding drainage and everything else. I was really surprised when I saw that we were waiving some of those.
I think, we're waiving the special permit requirement, not the underlying requirements, but I'll turn that over. Wait, I'm gonna let Emily,
Sarah,
I'm gonna let,
I need name and address.
that's Sandy Rogers.
Yeah.
So you'll let Emily address the question.
Yes, I'm happy to. So you are correct in that by right does mean that you don't have to do a special permit, which is probably the highest permitting process. It requires public hearing, it requires notification to butters, et cetera. By right does mean that you have to obviously have a building permit. You have to go, as we talked about earlier, if there are Conservation Commission or other regulations, you still have to do those. And you can, a municipality can require a process known as a site plan review as part of by right. And you have, this community has chosen to do that. So as part of the site plan review, you can require certain criteria. You are not allowed as a municipality to have a special permit for multifamily use in the 3A district that the municipality creates, because a special permit is by definition not by right. However, what we have done here is we've said this town, as with many other towns, has a special permit process for certain districts. It might be a floodplain in some communities. It might be a water protection district or an aquifer protection district. There's a number of them that are out there throughout Massachusetts that are requiring a special permit. Because you can't do that, what we've said is a developer coming in doesn't have to get the special permit, but all of the criteria for that special permit are now part of that site plan approval process. So they still have to meet the criteria. It's still considered through the process, but it's considered through site plan review and not through special permit. So we're not losing the criteria, we're just changing the process.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're gonna update the site plan review to make sure that gets included.
That's exactly
That
what
was
the zoning is
hard to
saying,
follow.
yes. Yes, it is.
Thank you
You're
for
very welcome.
clarifying that. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was like.
So I'm gonna ask you to hold let's hold questions. We'll have questions at the end, so we keep going through in case people need to leave. So Emily, are you up next? Do I-
I am, if I can share my
Yeah,
screen? I will
absolutely.
Pop it
How
up.
do I see? Mr. Gates, we're gonna hold questions to the end right now or till the next.
While you're getting the screen up,
Okay,
can you
sorry.
hear his question?
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Tim Gates, 2 Desmond Avenue. I've had a quick read through 3A and the draft in this form. And from 3A, I gather that the housing addition has to meet the requirements for a family with children, no exceptions. Looking further into that, I see a limit of a half the size of the existing structure. This applies except for the LCD. Reading further in the Board of Health regulations and CMR and the general law, habitation means bedrooms, living, dining room, kitchen, maybe the bathroom, and a lot of exceptions which are excluded from that definition. Worst case, least worst case, is a family with 2 adults, 2 teens, male and female. And that may be 2 separate bedrooms for the teen and a master bedroom for the adult couples. And that I remember either added up to 470 square feet of habitable space or 490, either way, with a cap of 900 square feet anywhere. Second, in your section on development, I think it's 4.9 for parent 2. It specifies that a requirement for a site plan review applies in all districts and sub-districts regardless, which is a very stiff penalty for a couple wanting to have a little bit of room on their house for a family thing. The tag end of it has an only enforcement officer. Nowhere is that person defined, his powers, his duties, his penalties, etc. And I think, I mean, the inspector of buildings, he's gonna have a problem. And on the general thing, anybody who's gonna add to their house, I think a professional engineer should be called in to justify that the additions will be supported by the existing structure physically, not strain columns in the.
So, thank you. Can you just speak briefly to the enforcement officer and the, and clarify that the site plan doesn't affect it only affects the multifamily.
The site plan, so the site plan review requirement is to any multifamily development that is developed under the overlay. The zoning enforcement officer, we could redefine as your building inspector. It's whoever is your zoning, so we could say building commissioner instead of zoning
It's
enforcement
defined in
officer.
section 12.
Then we're fine, then it's the same person.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're very
Trying to get over to Emily. Maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
I will do. So for the record, and more formally, my name is Emily Ennis. I'm president of Ennis Associates. We are urban planners and designers with our office in Newburyport. We've been hired by the town to work with the task force initially to do the modeling. They had already started some, we contributed some, they contributed some more. It was an iterative process. So initially to do the modeling, but then to come up with the zoning that takes the results of the model and puts it into tax or a zoning amendment. So we've been working with the town since I think about October and with the task force in October to do that. What I'm going to do is take you through, first of all, just an overview, what you see on screen. Not the first 2 pages because I cut it down to an outline, but after that, it is the same document that was sent to the task force earlier this week. All I've done is added some colors to make it a little bit more readable as you look at it on screen. So because all that black text is not very helpful. So a couple of things before I get started. One is that the town, as Mark said earlier, the town passes the zoning. Once it's passed, it becomes part of your local bylaws. It is administered locally. However, as part of the requirements and the compliance guidelines from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which I will refer to as HLC from now on, the towns that are required to do this are required to show that they are compliant with the law. And there's 3 components of that. One is the mapping that Mark's already gone through. One is the compliance model that he mentioned, and the other is the zoning. So HLC offers a pre-approval process. So before it goes to town meeting, you can look at it. And this is, I know the elected officials have already talked about this, but for the benefit of those in the room, where we are today is coming up with a draft to send with the compliance model and with the geography and the maps to HLC so they can let us know if we are compliant in their views. So what we're going to show you now is a draft. I think we're on version 2 or 3. We had a back and forth last week. The task force looked at it last week. We made some changes. So we're bringing this today to show the additional changes. Another thing that I want to call out just before we start is this isn't just pulling together the stuff that the task force looked at and trying to make it compliant. I did go through your zoning bylaws to see if there was anything else that might prevent multifamily development, might act as some sort of barrier. And I did that because HLC is also doing that. So as we look at the changes today, you'll see a couple of changes that don't
that aren't just the article itself. And that's because I'm looking to see if there's anything else that needs to be modified. So I'll talk you through that when we get there.
Before we,
Yeah.
so one thing I want to say to everybody in the crowd and watching on Zoom is this document is posted on the MBTA zoning website. So you can actually, at home, go to that link and it'll be there for you to follow.
Yes. It won't have the colors. It won't have the
It won't
pretty
have the
colors,
colors.
but the rest of the text will be the same. So, so just, I'm gonna give you the outline first, so you know where we're going, because if we plunge straight in, it'll be a little bit confusing. So there are 4, if you were to do an article tomorrow for town meeting, you would have 4 parts to that article. The first one is adding a new section 9.4, the community housing overlay districts. And the intent of this is to be compliant with section 3A. Like many zoning bylaws, it has a purpose. It has the applicability, so where and how does this zoning apply? It has definitions that are specific to this overlay district only. Any definitions that are in common are actually added later. It specifies the uses that are permitted under the overlay zoning. It identifies the dimensional standards, so dimensional standards, height, setback, lot size, et cetera. We've already talked about some of them. I'll scroll down so you can see the rest or more of the rest. It defines the parking requirements for this particular overlay district. It defines the site plan review process. It adds in and that includes the design review process. It adds in the development standards and the design guidelines, and we'll talk more about those as we get there, and the affordability requirements. Now, when doing a zoning bylaw like this, because you have an existing bylaw, one of the things that I try to do is look and see what we can just point to that's existing, so we're not changing things that don't need to be changed and what has to be new. So you will see, we already talked a little bit about those areas those components of your bylaws that need special permits and how we address those. There are a couple of other things that we point to in this. So I'm going to note the other sections. We do have some new definitions that are going into your existing section 2.0. You have an introductory section to your entire zoning bylaws. There's a minor modification there. There's a very minor modification to the regulation of marijuana businesses because the LCD is where the marijuana businesses are allowed. And there's a potential, we're looking at putting an overlay district in there. So we've got a minor modification to take into account that overlay district, and then modifying the zoning map, which you don't have because I realized we were going to have to do that this morning. So with that, let's start off with the purpose. So the purpose of, and that's right in the middle of the text under 9.41, the purpose of the community housing overlay districts, CHOD, is to allow multifamily housing as of right in accordance with section 3A. So just as we were talking about earlier, that's been a main purpose of this. And while attempting to preserve the character of the town. And so when we start talking about the standards, the development standards and the design guidelines, those are all things that the task force took into account in thinking about the architectural character of the town, the development patterns of the town, and how this zoning could have some requirements in it to preserve and maintain those. So the establishment and the applicability section is basically how does this apply geographically. It establishes it as an overlay district. We've already talked about this a little bit, but the idea is everybody who is a property owner is zoned for something that is your base district. An overlay district sits on top of that. Property owner has the choice of developing either under the base district or under the overlay district, but you can't pick and choose. Once you make a choice that you're developing under your base district, you have to stick with all the requirements of your base district. Once you're developing under the overlay district, you have to stick with all of the requirements of the overlay district.
Emily,
Yes.
under this plan, what rights are we taking away from existing property owners?
Because we're not changing the base districts, they keep all of the rights of the base district that they have now. We're actually adding an option with the overlay district, giving them a choice to do something.
So they're gonna
else.
have more rights
They will-
after this
They
is
will have
passed?
more options after this is passed. Yes, that is correct. So this establishes the CHOD as an overlay district. And it also says which governs if there's a conflict. And in this case, because you've chosen the overlay district governs. It also establishes the specific districts themselves, which Mark has walked you through in terms of maps, and the sub-districts, so that you can see here which is a district, which is a sub-district. And then, as Mark already alluded to in his discussion, there are certain requirements that apply to some districts, but not others, some sub-districts, but not others. So the definitions, I'm not going to go through in detail. I just want to let you know that what we've done is we've kept the ones in here that are appropriate to this particular overlay. In some cases, there are definitions in here that you do have in your existing section 2, but there's just enough of a difference. We didn't want to change your existing section 2, which has implications for the rest of your bylaws. So if there was any sort of difference or conflict, I just thought it was safer to put them here. Again, this is a draft. When it goes to HLC, it's a draft. When it comes back from HLC, it's a draft. So we still have time to modify anything if we need to. So let's jump to the permitted uses. So the uses that are permitted as of right are multifamily housing, unsurprisingly. And then some of the districts overlay your existing District G, your existing general district. And the task force wanted the ability to have ground floor commercial in these districts to be consistent with other development in the district. So what we've said is any districts that overlay District G, non-residential uses that are already allowed as of right in District G may be combined with the multifamily housing to create a mixed use. We're not changing the non-residential uses that are already as of right. We're saying if you already have them as of right, you can combine them with a multifamily use. You can have a mixed use district in that case. And those non-residential uses are restricted to the ground floor, then having the multifamily units on the upper floors. We've then allowed for accessory units. So parking is a standard accessory unit for any housing. You have to be able to park the units there. Customary home occupation, and I apologize, I did not have the correct section number in here. So that's still, but we'll add that. And then accessory unit structures that are on the same lot and customarily incidental to residential use, which include a storage shed, gazebo, or similar uses. Then in the Beaver Dam Road District, we had this conversation with the task force last week. That is potentially, if developed, would likely to be a larger style residential because it's up to 100 units. So we added some accessory units that might be appropriate to that. We did not add those same accessory units for multifamily in this area. Yes.
I hear you saying accessory units, but I see
Sorry.
you reading accessory uses.
Uses, I'm sorry, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Accessory uses, thank you. So we have pool, fitness center, community room, the types of things that for a development of no more than 100 units might be appropriate. And again, these are for discussion. So Mark's gone over the dimensional standards already, but just to reiterate that these are part of the zoning and this draft. So there's a minimum lot area for each district and sub-district. We talked about the additional lot area for per dwelling unit, which does act as a restrictor. Additional restrictions include the maximum dwelling units per lot. The frontage, lot width, lot coverage, height, setbacks, we tried to keep as similar to the existing districts as possible. There are some modifications that Mark has already gone through. In addition, we do allow lots to have more than one principal building. Multifamily under section 3A is defined as 3 units in a building or
more than one building with more than one unit at its minimum. That would be 2 duplexes on a lot. So we do allow for that possibility. Obviously, that depends on the size of the lot as to whether it could actually accommodate a second building on it. We do have building unit caps, which Mark mentioned earlier in a couple of the sub-districts. We allow for, we create a series of setbacks for accessory structures. So, and those were tied to your existing zoning. And then we allow exceptions for the height of buildings, for chimneys, ventilators, towers, et cetera, other ornamental features, and exceptions for renewable energy installations. Off-street parking, we've talked about a little bit already. Beaver Dam Road has to have 2 spaces per residential dwelling unit. And all the other sub-districts, it's 1.5 spaces, rounded up to the next whole number. We made that explicit in this zoning, so there'd be no question. We also require for a multifamily development to 25 units or more, which would be the only thing that would hit that is going to be Beaver Dam Road. But they have to, the planning board can require adequate parking to be inside the building itself, integrated into the structure. Site plan review, what I did here was look at 2 things. One is the requirements of compliance guidelines and sample zoning that HLC produced, and also your existing site plan review. And so tried to tie through the pieces that you've already had. So your procedure through appeal is incorporated into this. In other words, I'm pointing to your existing zoning. We haven't made any changes there. Where we are making changes is by adding a design review committee. So there's a large section in here of who the design review committee members are, how they're appointed, what their responsibilities are to the planning board. In terms of providing a written advisory opinion, when they need to provide it by, and then creating a design review process for this multifamily overlay district.
Just again, under the existing zoning, what is the design review process?
I don't recall having seen it.
Over 5, if you have
Yeah,
over 5
5.
parking spaces, you
You
have
have to have a design
site-
review.
Well, you have a
site plan review,
No,
which
no,
is
but
by
I'm
the planning
sorry,
board.
there, what
There
I'm
are no
trying to get-
design standards.
I don't think we have any existing design standards as she sits right now.
Right.
So this will institute design review process for the multifamily.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And that is an important point. Adding this to this overlay district does not impact the rest of your zoning. This is solely.
We haven't
for this
taken away anybody's rights.
I have not taken away anybody's rights on this, but we are adding another level of review. We're adding this level of design review. So the process is all called out there. Obviously, when we have questions, I'm happy to go back through in detail, or if any elected officials want me to stop. We have the conditions for site plan approval. We also have a note that an applicant can have a phased project, but if they do that, they have to present the entire project at once. This is particularly important for the affordability requirements, so because that does depend on the number of units, so you can't phase a project to avoid those. We then created the general development standards. So this is the first component where we have we're tying to a few standards in your existing bylaws. So for example, there's some performance requirements for industrial uses that we're saying do not apply. Because you're not doing industrial uses. We point to your existing parking requirements in terms of how large the parking spaces have to be, how they have to be buffered. We're going straight to those and including those. We're including your performance standards, except for a couple of things that are not appropriate to site plan review.
We're gonna let you keep going.
Okay, yes, yes. So there's 2 things, I think. One is section 6.3, performance standards for special permits and site plan review. So you'll note in C1, 2, and 3, well, I'm taking out 2 that relate to the fiscal impact And one, we're saying you can still have the requirements for the earth removal and filling, but you can't have special permit for it. So we're still pointing to the requirements, just not the special permit need. Fiscal analysis standards, so if you look at, site plan review isn't actually part of the, Mass General laws, unlike special permit process, which is, but there's a lot of case law about site plan review that has established what the process is over the years. And there are certain things that can be considered in site plan review. My understanding is that fiscal analysis standards is not one of those, so that's why that has been removed from this. The second question that several people had about the special permit is under D here. And again, you'll see that these currently require special permit. So what we're saying is that for the purposes of this section 9.4, the criteria are incorporated into the site plan review process. We're simply not requiring a special permit for them. So if anybody came forward that was within one of these districts, they would have to show that they met the criteria as part of the site plan review process. And that is important because you put those criteria in for a reason.
Can I just
Yes.
ask, maybe Mark, there, and maybe we should show it on a map, but the amount of the groundwater and protection district that is actually affected by an overlay district is actually just in the Beach Summer Street district.
No.
Or
no,
the
no,
Allen
no,
Street,
no.
Allen Street district,
Allen.
but only one of the 4 districts, and it's only a portion of that. So it's not the whole,
Yes.
so that's important.
Yeah, and I think it was your flood control
Is the-
district. I'm not actually sure anything is within that. But I put it in just.
But
to
our
be safe.
future flood control.
Yes,
For sure,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the LCD is in the water protection district.
Yes,
Okay.
so, okay.
So can you just say what section, like all these requirements are, because I don't see it in 9.4.9.
They're in the existing sections. So if you look at 9.4.8D, other sections requiring a special permit. So what I'm doing is I'm pointing you to the existing sections. So 6.4 for earth removal and filling, 10.1 flood control, 10.3 ground and surface water. So I'm saying the criteria that are already in those sections apply. I'm not repeating them in this district. I'm pointing future applicants to those. I'm just saying you can't require a special permit. Anything you have now that is a criteria is essentially incorporated into the site plan review process. That's what this says.
So there's standards
Okay, but-
about noise and lighting and.
No, it's for these, it's the specific standards under those sections for this D.
Could we add stormwater management?
So that comes into the general development standards, which is next. So, and the answer is yes, absolutely. Stormwater management part of site plan review. It's a good question. So the design guidelines, which is section 9.4.9, is a combination of 3 different sources. One is the sample zoning put out by HLC, has a series of development standards in it. So we've pulled from those. Also, the task force had a subcommittee on design guidelines. A general set of design guidelines for all of the districts except the LCD, the new Beaver Dam district, bless you. And then the second discussion was the design guidelines solely for the Beaver Dam, again, assuming that it would be a different style. HLC requires that development standards and to the same extent, design guidelines, anything that's putting in, that's controlling the development has to be specific, it has to be measurable, it has to be quantifiable. So obviously the stuff that was in the sample zoning, HLC put out, they had reviewed that, so we're able to pull from that. For the design guidelines, the task force, I just want to say, had done a lot of great work on that, but the way they were initially written was more as a standalone document. And I'd been requested to merge them together and put them in something that could be as part of the zoning for the reasons that were mentioned in the earlier meeting. So
This is the sort of the first take at pulling those design guidelines from those documents in here, creating them as measurable, quantifiable. So some of them will have changed a little bit. Some of the language, I very much shortened the purpose to put it in here. So just for the task force members and the others reviewing it, that's what you're going to see here tonight is my first stab at doing that. So this first combination, starting off with the building placement and the relationship to the public realm, what I tried to do was group all of the ones that applied to everybody together and to group them into categories. So starting off with buildings, how buildings worked on the site, how buildings worked with each other, thinking about corner lots and infill lots, because those would both be important, especially for the non-Beaver Dam districts, the ones within the half mile. Then we go on to building massing and orientation, and these follow both the organization that the task force gave, but also a fairly standard organization for design guidelines, looking at roofs and the requirements for those, looking at windows and the requirements for those. Also talked about the renovation and expansion of existing buildings, because there was an assumption that some buildings might be added on to, say, a two-family becoming a three-family, which would qualify as multifamily. So we've added those materials, which are important in thinking about architectural elements, also important in thinking about an existing built context. And then finally, getting to additional design guidelines for the Beaver Dam Road District and the more specific requirements. For example, you would have to create a pedestrian environment there. You would have to link it to the existing street in a way that you wouldn't in the already developed areas around the train station. So there's a lot more in there about pedestrian connectivity, and also thinking about if there were multiple clusters of buildings on the site, the task force wanted to make sure that those related to each other and weren't separated, relationship of parking and open spaces to those clusters. So that's sort of the high level overview of the design guidelines. And then integrating nature, sustainability, stormwater into those. And then finally, I think somebody mentioned the earlier meeting about waivers. So the general development standards only, the planning board and the applicant could agree on a waiver, not for the dimensional standards, not for the criteria that were in the other zoning bylaws that we pointed to, because those aren't just the general development standards. Could agree on a waiver if there was a good reason to do so. And what I tend to put something like in there, this language actually did mostly come from the sample zoning that HLC put out. And the reason being is you may have a lot that has unusual characteristics. It may be in irregular size and shape. It may be topographically challenged. There may be a better design solution than one that was anticipated in the design guidelines. And so providing the flexibility for both parties to agree can be important. So it's in there for discussion. It does not, however, allow the developer to come in and say, I'm going to do this and you can't stop me, because it requires agreement. And it also doesn't allow the planning board to say, hey, developer, we think we have a better idea. You have to do it this way. It has to be an agreement. So then final piece of this, and I'll stop talking and answer as many questions as I can, is affordability requirements. So a community, a municipality is not required to have affordability. That is a choice. And so you all are looking at having that affordability. Mark mentioned earlier, there are some restrictions, 80% of area median income for 10% of units is the base standard. If you do an economic feasibility analysis, you can go up. The task force is looking at having a 20%. So you see the 20% language in there now. Just know it is subject to the results of the economic feasibility analysis. And we have some standard development standards and administration in there. And with that, I'll stop, because that's the main part of the zoning.
I do have a question.
Of course.
And that is, if the proposed multi-unit development needs a relief on setbacks or believes it needs a relief on setbacks or height. Where typically a single family home would go to the ZBA.
Mhm.
If they go to the ZBA, does it no longer become as of right? And does the ZBA, how does that work? How does the ZBA process work with as of right multifamily zoning?
My assumption is a variance for those things would be the same as any other requested variance. So you would have to go through the ZBA, but I will double check on that. You're actually the first person to have asked that.
I thought that you
Exit.
didn't do it under, you didn't issue variances or special permits under the overlay district, that the only way that would be available would be under the underlying zoning.
That's a good point, actually. That might be true because I think you may well be right on that. I was forgetting this.
So that's gonna be that's very important that we know.
Yeah, we'll double check on that. So,
But you follow all the rules or you
Okay,
go to
so
the
that's
underlying
I'm gonna
zoning.
go to the underlying zoning. Yeah, I'll double check. I think you're.
Because I don't want to do variances.
No, I know.
The overlay district, just to set the record straight.
Well, and the point of the overlay district is it is a
Right.
choice, right?
Right,
So,
yeah.
if you can't meet the requirements, but let me just double
Good,
check.
yeah.
because-
Okay. I'm gonna just in the interest of time, because it's late, it's getting late. I want to give Chris the floor for a minute to just review the overview. Do you want to do that on design guidelines? Do you think we're just, or do you think we've covered it?
Shall I?
No,
Did
let's-
you have a presentation?
I have a little quick
Quick,
presentation.
he has a quick few slides on design guidelines. So, and then we can take questions and comments on both. Sorry. Design guidelines. Oh, not sharing, sorry. Help me here, Laura. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes. Okay.
Okay. All right, so design guidelines. There's been a lot of talk about them with the task force and with the whole town. The question is, what are they and why do we want to have them? So they're both standards and suggestions to control and guide what buildings look like. Guidelines consider the crucial impact of the scale, density, variation of architectural styles, and the quality of construction. Why? Well, we want to preserve and enhance the town's unique elements. We are not like Nantucket. We don't have gray shingles with white trim everywhere. We're not like Newburyport with brick everywhere. We're not like Concord with white clapboards and black shutters. What makes this town so appealing is the human scale and the diversity of its streets and buildings. The task force invited a small group of architects and designers who are residents of the town to help create these guidelines. They reached a couple of conclusions. The first is that the primary tool for identifying appropriate design for any building is the context of its neighborhood. And with a variety of building types and styles in the town, the context changes depending upon the site. The town does not encourage replication, but rather interpretation and complementary design. With a rich architectural environment, good design will respect and complement the surroundings. The question is, how do we accomplish this with design guidelines? Well, we'll have specific requirements in the bylaw which will dictate and ensure the proper scale and appropriate siting of buildings. We'll have suggestions and illustrations to guide architects and developers. We'll have expert advice from design professionals through this design review committee. We'll review the review process will force applicants to consider the context of the neighborhood. And there'll be a balance of objective criteria and creative collaborative design solutions. The review process for developments in the community housing overlay districts will go like this. All developments in the CHOD are subject to site plan review by the planning board. I should note here that most projects will be small, perhaps undertaken by current owners and local contractors, not by large-scale developers. The standards for development are spelled out in section 6.3 of the current zoning bylaw. Site plan review is not a discretionary permitting process, but it is a determination that the development conforms to these specific standards. This is a common zoning tool in other communities, including Manchester. We have it in several overlay districts now. The applicant must demonstrate conformity with the standards. And the planning board must make findings that the development is either in compliance or that specific changes must be made to reach compliance. So how will this work? Well, the applicant will submit a plan to the town. This would be for any development allowed under the CHOD, under the overlay district. Planning board will receive an application for site plan review. The planning board will then convene a design review committee. And will engage, and the committee will engage with the applicant's design team. The designers must submit a statement of their design intent and how the building design will relate to the context of the neighborhood. When the design review board is ready to make a recommendation, the planning board will schedule a public hearing to review the project under the site plan review process. The planning board will then apply performance standards in evaluating the plan as spelled out in the overlay district process. This will include the design review board recommendation. The planning board will then determine that the proposed development complies with the performance standards. These standards include such things as site lighting, noise control, site development and clearing, location of parking and driveways, landscaping, aesthetics, which will include the design review process, and the location and adequacy of utilities. So that's how this all works. We can go rid of all the old slides. So we can now get general questions for this
Yeah,
whole thing.
thanks. I thought it made sense to take those together. Okay, so comments from any of the board members, questions, comments, a lot to take in, and I encourage everyone to actually read the zoning now that we've got its organization. And
Okay. In spite of cars, there is a concern among some people that they are losing control of their neighbors. And Gar's absolutely right. No one is losing any use of his own property, and people in the overlay district will gain more rights. However, does the site review process require notification of abutters?
Is your current site plan review
Yes.
process, then it does. We have not changed. So I want to make it very clear, your current process for site plan review has not changed. What we've done is we've added some things to it, but we haven't taken away from your current site plan.
so we've added
process.
criteria, but not changed the process.
Exactly.
Well, you've changed the
So-
process with a design review board.
Yes,
But added, but
that's
in
the
fact,
addition, yes.
the neighbors will be notified of a site plan review and
A public hearing.
a public hearing. And will see the results of the design review. So in fact, the neighbors are gaining at least more
Input.
access.
Input. Right, because you currently don't have any input on something that your current neighbor does by right, which could be
Mhm.
the color of the house or the,
So,
yeah.
just,
Yeah,
so,
very
Gar, not only are you right, you're right in the case of being able to watch what your neighbors are, influence what your neighbors are doing.
If it's in the multifamily
Yes.
provisions,
Yes.
if your neighbor is doing,
Something that's already by right.
then you have no input.
Yes. Greg, what have I done wrong?
Well, I think we should clarify though,
So the site plan review process, you can put conditions, but you can't deny.
Yes, that is
I
correct.
just want to make sure we're clear on it.
Yes.
So that is a little different than
And special permit.
special permit, which you can deny outright. So that is a difference.
But if the project doesn't meet the criteria, it can be denied.
Well, you
So
basically
it's
more
to get
conditions
to
to
the-
force them to comply.
Yes.
If they submitted an application that was not complete and they refused to submit all of the required information, you could deny it then. Yes.
The other thing we've heard from a couple of different forums is that in general, developers want to try to hear from the design, if it's a reasonable process, that the design review process is sort of one that people want to be good neighbors, use the materials that and to get guidance that is reasonable and so that's what we've heard from a number of people.
One of the things I like about a well-designed design review process is and well-designed zoning for that matter, is that everybody in the room understands why you're in the room, whose role is what. So for, to use HLC's terms of measurable, quantifiable design guidelines or design standards, it means that when the applicant submits, they've already read that, they want to get something done, so they're submitting in accordance with those design guidelines. And then it means when everybody's in the planning board's meeting, the planning board, the developer, the public, they all know what they're talking about, right? Because everybody has the criteria in front of them and can discuss whether or not it meets it. So it can be a valuable tool for a community and for a developer, to your point.
Okay, Mary.
Could I ask a clarifying question on that? Because something's not connecting with me here. So you get rid of the special permit process and you put it in site plan review that cannot be denied. So part of, say, for the water protection district, which, all of these special permits are for the health and safety of residents. So for that particular one, say we would usually do an underground water recharge system. If a developer says to us, who's doing the site plan, that is going to be expensive and onerous, can they say, I don't want to do it, and we don't have any teeth to that?
You also have stormwater management controls. So here's where the question becomes, can they give you an alternate solution? Because technologies change, strategies change, that is equivalent to not doing the underwater recharge system. Is that something that, because the conditions that Greg mentioned, you are allowed to put conditions on the use. So the question becomes, if they say, this is too expensive, then you can come back and say, what is your alternative? Because you still have to meet.
But clearly, so, and done a lot of site plan review, so if something's just too expensive, it doesn't matter. If the criteria requires that you do something and the developer doesn't want to do it, planning board can say no. So, but your criteria needs to be defensible.
Exactly.
Be clear,
Yes.
and the developer clearly has to say, no, I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
So, you can say no, or you can require additional conditions to a project to make it comply, then they can choose to appeal it.
Right.
So there's two different ways you can handle it.
And what is the appeal
Defensible
process?
criteria is
I just thought the by right was different. So you saying we can put teeth
No,
in the
it's-
special
It's
permit?
by right for the project,
Site.
but
For the
it's
use,
still
yeah.
subject to site plan review, and
Yeah.
your site plan review has criteria. Your other things that are no longer special permits have criteria, and they have to comply with that. So that's where, depending on what the criteria is, you either add conditions that they don't like and they appeal it, and you might approve a project with all these conditions, and a couple of them they don't like. or you say they're not doing, they refuse, we're writing a denial, and this is why they're not meeting the criteria in site plan review. So,
And what's the appeal process? Zoning board?
no.
No.
They go to court. So basically,
So
it
they,
almost never happens. Let's
Right.
put it this way. It almost never happens.
okay, so it's not as just a
Yeah,
ZBA.
whether it's
not-
a huge project or a small project, it almost never happens.
Yeah.
Some sort of adjustment,
Negotiate.
modification, negotiation, they go, okay, we'll do that.
And HLC has said site plan review is okay.
They have said site plan review is okay, although I haven't heard this month, but last month there was a back and forth on site plan review. They do say, and I'm assuming this zoning is going to your town council, but they do say to double check your site plan review regulations with your town council. They will, when this is submitted to them for pre-approval, they will be looking at the areas, they will be looking at the compliance model, they will be looking at the drop zoning, and they will be looking at your entire bylaw. So to your point about the recharge, they will be looking at that and they will come back and say whether or not they feel that or anything else is defensible under this.
So do we need to fix things in our bylaw that we know are wrong as part of this process?
We've gone through, we've gone through and identified a few things.
Like that A&Rs are not allowed in the water protection district, for
So
example.
they may highlight some other things that you need to look at. That are related to multifamily. Let me make it clear, to my knowledge, they are not going through and say, oh, we found 12 things in the bylaw.
Okay,
It
good.
is solely related.
We already have that list.
It is solely related, or should be solely related to whether or not this overlay district is actually going to work. Yes.
All right, any other comments and questions from boards? All right, how
I'd
about-
just like to say, I hate consultants. I think Emily thus far has done a good job.
Thank God for writing zoning.
Yeah, really.
Okay, comments from the public or questions with limited time here. Brenda. Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
Me?
Yes?
Oh, Donna first.
Donna, sorry.
I just have the bylaws here. I have a couple things. You've done a wonderful job answering most of my questions, so that will keep me very, very limited in time. I just have some clarifying things.
Sure.
So just at 9.4, on the accessory uses, it says, the following uses are considered accessory as of right to any of the permitted uses in section 9.4.4.1. And we talk about parking, including surface parking within a structure such as an attached or detached above ground or underground parking garage. So I'm just trying to think of it, not that this would happen, but just could be a question at town meeting. In any of the other districts, could you potentially, if you had enough lot coverage, do a parking garage in one of the other districts? I'm just saying.
Like a next door. So this is only applicable to the districts under the zoning.
Yeah.
And it's only as an accessory use. So for example.
But if you had two 6,000 unit, like if, let's say you had two houses and the guy decided to one
Right.
side take them down. You would potentially, let's say on Pine Street, or let's say on C Street or wherever, you could hypothetically, probably never happen, have a parking garage next to like a multifamily.
Let's say Newport Park.
Newport Park, yeah.
Only,
you.
only for the number of units.
Just saying, it's
that-
still a parking garage, very different than what they already have right
Yeah,
now.
understood, but just to clarify that it's only for the number of spaces that they need for those
Yep,
units. Yeah.
yep, okay, I just wanted just
Yep.
to clarify. And then, line 109 under exceptions. We just talked about, so we know with the mandate, there is no climate mitigation or green initiative. However, it does state here, since the mandate does not include climate mitigation or green activity, you've written a clause that if they want to add, you would allow changes in the dimensional standards, correct? So for example, solar panels on the top of the house or
Right.
different things of that nature. So if you have in Newport Park or Potter House, 4 stories, in theory, granted, it's not livable, you can't live in it, but it could be higher, depending, I don't know how much would go on the top of the house. I'm just trying to think of like, not that it would happen again.
Yeah, so Pine Street, 2.5 stories. For
There's only
example.
2 there's 4.
Oh, the 4, yeah.
I'm just looking at the 4, but the
Yeah.
2.5 could go
You can have a solar panel attached to your roof.
It
is
could
what we're
be,
saying.
that could be high or whatever.
Well, solar panels can only get attached at a certain angle
Okay.
to your roof.
I don't know what
so-
the economics of, maybe Laura
Yeah.
has any type of solar or.
They're like under 6 inches.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
roof
it's
is
very
not
low
long,
profile.
yeah.
And I,
Another question, I'm just thinking of.
and I have a 40-foot high house and I have solar panels added that were approved under a building permit.
Okay.
Yeah, same, come to think of it, yeah.
Just a question. And the special permit thing, that made me feel much better, as long as we make some of these other changes, I think that would make us pretty, but my concern too is the building inspector being our zoning board, like, who's gonna be enforcing and following that these things are going to be happening during this process? So our current building inspector is very stretched, Rockport, Essex, Manchester. I'm not saying that there's a ton of stuff that's gonna happen in the downtown, but let's say the LCD is starting to boom or think. It's a lot for somebody who's very part-time here in Manchester. I don't know if Mark has, I'm just, who's gonna oversee all of that?
I think the building inspector is our zoning enforcement officer, and I think this task force work and any future additional workload for the zoning enforcement officer is a separate issue for the select board and the town administrator.
It's in the bylaw on the last page that it's enforced by the zoning board enforcement officer, so I was just.
Right, it is the building inspector.
Yeah, I think it's hefty.
But my point is whether we have a full-time or a part-time building inspector, whether we need a full-time or a part-time building inspector is not really our jurisdiction.
Maybe we should make the chair.
not a
the
zoning
ZBA
matter.
review.
It's not a zoning matter.
It's also not a change.
I am up for reappointment this year. That could change.
All right, let's, I'm gonna let Sandy.
My last question.
Okay.
Thank you, Sandy. So on the affordability piece,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about, on line 526, affordable housing required within a development project, a fractional unit shall be rounded down.
Yep.
We've normally rounded up, I believe, or is that incorrect?
We have rounded up, but
Right,
it's
so why are we rounding down? You have,
Go ahead.
the way you were going.
I guess so, the sample zoning has it as rounded down. I think your EFA, your economic feasibility analysis, will speak to the final language on that. The problem has been for communities that say, for example, that they have it as 10% rounded up and they start at 5 units. And so if you round up 10% at 5 units, you're actually creating a 20% affordability requirement. So they've been allowing a round up if you're at 10 units or more, because you're not overstating the requirement. But I would hold off on too many questions on that until after we get the EFA. That it's a great question,
I
but I
just don't
suspect
wanna
it's going to
limit-
change.
okay,
Yeah,
understood. Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
That's the only reason.
Appreciate letting me ask.
Okay,
a
great.
question.
Sandy, you have one more question?
I have a couple questions, yes. The parking where it just seems automatic that 1.5 is gonna go up to 2. And we have these maximum size limitations on these lots, and some of these lots are relatively small. So if there's a 70% limit and you're rounding up, have we factored in that it's really a round up and that they're going to have to bring down the building size if we're using parking as part of that 70%?
That's in the model.
Yeah.
But remember, they can have pervious parking. Doesn't have to be impervious. The 70% is coverage by structures and impervious surface, so you
Okay.
can have pervious parking.
But
Okay,
those,
so if they're rounding up and they're at that limit, they can't pave, they can use gravel.
sure.
Okay.
Well, that's
That was a little-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put a fine point on
Which
it.
then which then leads me to the Beaver Dam, or I think that's what it's called. Has that site been evaluated regarding the efficacy to have such a development on it? We have a huge industrial plant complex that's being built, that we're putting a lot of impervious surface there already, going downhill. And then to have such an amount of this land potentially impervious next to Sawmill Brook, like, has that been evaluated could, you know, a developer come in and say, yeah, we're gonna do 90 units out of the 100, and then it just not fly because it's just not suitable for that space? I know we've got storage, but that's very different than what we're talking about here regarding the size of what we're talking about building. Has there been an evaluation done? And if it can't be done, is the state gonna say, hey, you're gonna have to go back to the table? If we ever say, no, you know, we've got all of the reviews done, you cannot build it there, and they're gonna say, hey, you've got like 1/2 of your, or 1/5 of the amount of the density, just can't build. Has anyone reviewed this yet?
So let's let Emily speak.
So I can answer part of that. So the unit capacity number is not a building target. So in other words, it demonstrates compliance, that nobody's coming back and saying, oh, you said there's gonna be 100 units on the site. There's not 100 units on the site. HLC will, I mean, they're reviewing all the geography, so they may come back and ask some questions about feasibility. That's why the town is doing a pre-approval, is to check on that before this goes to town meeting. In terms of evaluating the site, Mark, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, obviously, if, let's say it turns out that, based on the impervious area, for parking, drainage, I mean, and they can't make the drainage work. Soils are really bad, or, or they just don't have enough area. If they only get 70 units, they only get 70 units. I mean, it's the limitation of the property. No one guarantees anytime a developer buys a piece of land, there's no guarantee just because the zoning allows something that you're gonna be able to put it there because the site conditions may not allow it. It might be all ledge underneath all those buildings and the parking where all the trailers are stored. So they may have a hard time locating detention basins and infiltration chambers and septic systems. It probably isn't. It probably would be able to develop a fair amount of that, because it is already developed, so, and completely altered. And we are requiring 50-foot setbacks, and that's calculated into, so that's a large amount of land, and that's calculated into the density of, I mean, they have to build smaller units, right? So that they can have less impervious surface for buildings, and maybe they still get 100. But so, you know, that's during the site evaluation.
Can I just add to that, Mark, that one of the reasons the task force picked that site is because it's already heavily disturbed. We thought if we were going to a pristine piece of the LCD, people would have questions about it. In this case, you know, it already is, it's, there's nothing really,
Green.
So we thought that would be a good site for housing.
Okay, let's, it's getting to be late. I'm gonna take a question from.
Excuse me, Katarina Gates, 2 Desmond Avenue and 31 School Street. I think it's interesting how this MBTA plan started such a big discussion and a lot of different troubles from different cities and towns. But anyway, that's where we are. And I wonder, isn't it interesting that so many, after the plan started being taught and meetings and so on, for a few $1 million that they're offering us to bribe, we can just go for it, which is great. I think we need more housing. If I have a property that I can build 2 homes, I'd like to be able to build 2 homes there. I think it's nice for people who, you know, want to live with less expensive than $1 million homes to be able to buy it. I think that's great. But have started, unfortunately, going this way before the MBTA plan is approved. We already have 2 neighbors of ours, the only neighbors we have in our property, already purchasing. They're involved both to build and sell. And the first one could not we were surprised that they applied only at the conservation because they're less than 200 feet.
Did you have a question about this?
Yes, this
This,
is where I'm heading.
Okay.
But we're going through recent at this point, so I'm explaining. And so they applied for an expansion to the house, which they could do. They had the land, it faces 2 streets, they can do it. They applied for a parking, which they could do, but they applied for 1 indoor parking space, they're building 2. They applied for structure above to be done, they gutted the whole house and expanded everything to 3 stories high. I suppose they could do. I mean, at this point, what do you do? That's what they're doing. And they're selling already these images of homes that they're building, of condos for $1,350,000 each. That's what is happening. Now, if we have this kind of structures, are they affordable? They're not really affordable. Who can pay as a young person $1,350,000 for a condo?
So, please.
So I'm
I'm sorry to
concerned,
interrupt you, but
we're talking about,
Tell me what this has to do
We're talking-
with the
yes.
overlay districts and the,
I know, but is affordable that we're gonna be voting soon for it? Is it affordable? Something that is making people to be able to afford to buy, or is it affordable just the word that they use?
so there are criteria and they have to be deeded. Is what I call big A affordable,
yeah.
as opposed to low cost, which is distinct. So, okay, thank you.
Now,
Can you
one of
just
the
focus on
one of
the,
the neighbors was that. The other neighbor, we're talking about.
can you focus your
lots.
comment on
Yes.
this
If you
topic?
have a non-conforming lot and you apply for special permits and you're willing to build now, even in the future, instead of the 10 feet to leave 5 or none or whatever, you are supposed to be, I heard tonight, to be informed about the site visit. We were not told about it. I know it took place.
But
And so what
Your
happens?
area is not in the district that we're talking about doing an overlay district. now. So this is a problem. I understand that you think that the building inspector should have done more to, but that's not.
That's not what we're talking.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the special rules for multifamily housing.
I understand
And,
that.
and the
I
notice
understand.
to abutters is with respect to the public hearing on the application, not with respect to the site visit. The site visit is posted in the paper.
Okay, let's,
But they informed
I'm
us about
gonna, Lindsay, next,
I
this
know,
one,
but
I'm gonna, we're gonna stop at 9,
Don't
so.
post catching on this because I'm a taxpayer for 38 years.
So
And I like to say something that I'm
yes, but
very,
we're trying
I'm
to
very
get,
sensitive to this.
yes, I
I
know.
bought my home with my own money, not my husband's. And that's why I'm on the deed and not like a lot of other people. So I'd like to be heard of how I feel about it.
Okay, but this isn't the place to
Well,
do
what
that.
place do I go? Tell me so.
So you need to talk to the building inspector
The
about your
inspector has
concerns.
gone, Mrs.
So, So I'm gonna, sorry, with
We've
all
got
due
people
respect,
that
haven't
with all due respect, I'm going to
to.
take the next question. We're gonna stop at 9 and certainly invite people to continue to give us comments. I'm gonna take Tom because he hasn't said anything yet.
I said, God was speaking to me from above. So
Oh, okay.
a deep voice from the.
Yeah, but, actually, I'm gonna go back.
There's a
to
couple
Lindsay.
hands raised.
Lindsay, what about Lindsay?
Lindsay, you have some,
I'm just, Lindsay Banks, 44th Street, I keep seeing the claims that the state is gonna have oversight over the zones once we put them into place. Can you clarify if, once and for all, whether or not that, like, we do retain like local autonomy over these zones, even after we've passed all these?
I'm happy to,
Changes.
yes, so, absolutely, in terms of the implementation, all that means, my understanding is all that means, is that if you should change the zoning, you just have to go back and prove that it's still compliant. But in terms of day-to-day, that's local. Thank you. You're very welcome.
I'm gonna take a comment from Sammy. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and please keep it to the topic we're talking about.
Of course. Thank you for your time. I was just in regards to the Powder House Lane property. How would the work on Elm Street? Elm Street Bridge, and the fact that this property abuts Central Pond and the Powder House Hill conservation area. How would those, things affect that site? Thank you so much.
Should you tell us your address, please?
Sure, 4 Powder House Lane, Apartment 3.
So I think it would be a wetlands question, right?
Yeah.
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 So if someone wanted to develop in the Powder House property further back than the existing buildings, they would be subject to the Wetlands Protection Bylaw. If they're within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. And obviously, the Powder House Hill Reservation is a different owner. So that is town conservation land. So unless something changes, that they cannot develop on that site.
Thank you
Great.
so much for your time.
Sure.
Sarah Pierce.
Yes, hi, thank you. Sarah Pierce, 9 Friend Street. I had a question regarding the special permit, and it's under section 9.4. The first is section 6.4, earth removal and filling. Does that include ledge? I know Mark had just spoken about some, if the property or the developer is trying to build on ledge. We currently have a project in town before all of the zoning has gone through that has done quite a job on some ledge removal. And I'd like to know what the earth removal includes as far as, is it dirt? Is it ledge? Is it, what does it cover?
All of it.
I believe it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
quantity, it's quantity triggered by
Yeah.
certain
So it
quantities.
does include ledge.
Yes.
Our current bylaw doesn't change under this. Our
Right.
current bylaw is very generous in terms of how much ledge is allowed to be removed before a special permit is required.
Right.
And it excludes any earth removal with respect to the construction of a structure.
Or driveway. I
Right,
think.
but it does,
Utilities.
but it does require the earth removal in the setback. So Sarah, I think the answer to your question is the same standards that would apply under today's zoning. And they are enforced
So will
by,
you revisit the ledge removal, considering like a single family home has changed an area of town substantially on 2 streets? Yes.
Certainly something that could be looked at down the road.
Okay.
zoning,
then just-
that's a zoning change rather than the multifamily.
Right, yeah,
But
it's concerning.
That's one on our to-do list. It is
Yeah,
on-
thank you. Thank you very much. And then also, I just want to just speak about the affordability piece again. I don't think we can honestly say to the public that we can guarantee affordability. We can ask for it. We can, but we can't force the developer to put affordable housing in Manchester. Is that correct?
No, we can require it.
We can afford.
You can require it, but how do you enforce it? How do you say to that developer where it can't be cost prohibitive that they have to build that?
Will be a condition of the approval of the.
Right, so that's where the EFA that we mentioned earlier, the economic feasibility analysis comes in. It analyzes what is not, it will tell you what will not be cost prohibitive, and then that's what goes into the zoning. But once in the zoning, you can require it. It would be required to be eligible to be on the subsidized housing inventory list, and then there are rules under state law about how that is done. But you absolutely can require it. The question is just what the EFA will say is appropriate for.
Appropriate. And then who, I know the building inspector is enforcing such things as permits or site plan reviews, et cetera. Who is enforcing the affordability piece?
It's all covered in state law.
And we can stipulate 10% without going through the economic analysis.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
It being 9 o'clock, I think I'm gonna close this portion of the meeting. If you have other comments, please email them to us, speak to somebody. But we've been here for 2 hours, and if anybody doesn't have enough, objection, if there are no objections, then if you will, close out this portion of the night and thank particularly the select board for sticking with us tonight and,
Looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, okay.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jeff, John,
Yes.
I say yes.
Okay, and then, you have minutes to do? You wanna do that tomorrow?
Ribbons.
May 9th and May 16th.
Motion to approve the minutes.
We approve the task force minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sounds like it's
Okay, and
unanimous.
I think, I know there's probably lots more discussion we could have, but let's, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
We have to join the task force first.
I move we adjourn the task force.
You get to go first. I make a motion to adjourn the planning board.
Second.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, so much.
I'm
I'm shaking.